Subscribe to our channel, turn on the notification bell, and always check out the most terrible stories here. In the sleepy town of Springwood, Emily's adolescence was marked by an eerie quiet. Raised in a seemingly ordinary family, she always stood out for her sharp intelligence and charming smile. Yet behind the facade of normalcy was a growing darkness, a shadow that lay silently over his young soul. From an early age, Emily showed an unusual fascination with the human body and its mysteries. While her schoolmates devoted themselves to activities more typical of youth, she spent hours on end studying anatomy and reading about forensic medicine. His inquisitive mind longed to understand the secrets hidden beneath the skin and the mysteries that hid in the bowels of the human body. While her parents attributed her unusual curiosity to her academic ambition, few knew of the dark fantasies that began to form in her troubled mind. Emily found pleasure in playing with dolls she made herself, sewing together limbs and organs from different sources, creating grotesque figures that reflected her distorted view of the world. As time passed, the darkness inside Emily grew, fueled by a sense of alienation and despair that consumed her from within. As her schoolmates prepared for a life of possibility and promise, she found herself increasingly isolated, sinking into an abyss of loneliness and self-contempt. It was during these tumultuous years that the seed of evil was planted in her heart. The feeling of powerlessness and desperate need for control took Emily on a dark journey, where the lines between good and evil became increasingly blurred, and when the opportunity finally arose, she didn't hesitate to seize it, giving vent to her most sinister fantasies and becoming what she always feared and desired at the same time, a murderous nurse. After graduating high school with honors, Emily decided to follow her passion for anatomy and medicine by enrolling in a prestigious nursing college. Beneath the surface of his dedication to his studies, however, his restless mind continued to weave dark plans. During her college years, Emily developed exceptional clinical skills, demonstrating impressive dexterity in the most diverse areas of nursing. However, behind her facade of professionalism, she began to use her knowledge for much darker purposes. As she gained access to vulnerable patients, Emily saw them as just pieces on a macabre board, each representing an opportunity for her to exert control over life and death. Under the guise of meticulous care, she committed her heinous acts, inflicting pain and suffering without remorse. As her number of victims grew, Emily found herself increasingly entangled in a web of lies and deceit skillfully woven to cover up her crimes. Her sick mind led her to justify her actions as a service to humanity, a way to free souls from their fragile and imperfect bodies. However, as the police became suspicious of the series of unexplained deaths plaguing the city, the noose began to close around Emily. The murderous nurse found herself embroiled in a desperate battle for survival as she fought to keep her macabre exploits hidden from the light of day. Meanwhile, the trail of pain and destruction left by Emily continued to haunt those who survived her evil deeds. Family and friends of the victims cried out for justice as the town of Springwood trembled under the weight of its dark secrets. And so, as Emily continued her deadly dance between good and evil, she found herself closer and closer to the abyss from which there was no return. Fate awaited her, its sharp claws ready to claim her tormented soul, as the world around her plunged deeper and deeper into darkness. The worst story about Emily's actions at the hospital was an event that haunted the halls of the medical center for years, leaving a trail of destruction and despair that would mark everyone who witnessed her horrors. It was during a dark winter night, when the snow was falling heavily outside, that Emily decided to act once again in her macabre game of power and control. An elderly patient, Mrs. Thompson, had been admitted to the hospital with a series of medical complications, leaving her frail and at the mercy of nursing care. Emily saw the old lady as a perfect opportunity to satisfy her darkest desires. Disguising her intention behind a kind smile and comforting words, she began administering lethal doses of medication to Mrs. Thompson, slowly undermining her health and stealing her life in small increments. As Mrs. Thompson's health rapidly deteriorated, doctors and nurses at the hospital struggled to understand the causes of her increasingly serious condition. Emily, meanwhile, watched silently from the sidelines, relishing the feeling of power that came from controlling someone else's destiny. As the days passed and Mrs. Thompson drew closer to death, Emily became more and more audacious in her wicked deeds. She reveled in the idea that she had the power to decide who lived and who died, playing with her patients' lives as if they were pawns in a sadistic game. Finally, one fateful night, Mrs. Thompson succumbed to the lethal combination of drugs administered by Emily, leaving behind a devastated family and a hospital in shock. The truth about the killer nurse's evil deeds was slowly emerging as authorities prepared to launch an investigation into the mysterious deaths plaguing the hospital. But despite efforts to cover her tracks, Emily was unprepared for the crushing weight of guilt that was beginning to weigh on her troubled conscience. As she drowned in a sea of regret and remorse, the specter of justice loomed ever closer, determined to reveal the truth behind the horrors haunting Springwood Hospital.